Dear friends, before we begin today's story, let me ask you one thing. Where are you watching this video from? Leave your city or country in the comments. I love seeing the footprints of these little stories spread everywhere. And one more thing. Where you're sitting? What time is it? Is it sunny, rainy, or a quiet evening? If you've ever had a night that you wished you could erase, or a night that changed everything in a way you never expected, then today's story might touch your heart very closely. So let me take you back to that fateful night where it all began. It was a long day that could wear down your soul. You know, the kind of day where the air is heavy, the clock hands seem to flow like honey, and your colleagues just pass by like lifeless shadows. At 55, working in a male-dominated law firm, I used to find that a source of pride. Now, only exhaustion. My name is Elena. I came home later than usual that night. The house was quiet, thank goodness. I kicked my heavy heels off at the door as if they weighed 100 pounds. The yellow light from the kitchen spilled into the living room. I didn't think much of it, just walked straight to the wine rack before taking off my coat. 3 glasses? Maybe 4, I can't remember. And then I slid down to the living room floor, back against the sofa, letting some lazy jazz spin on the old record player. Miles Davis's trumpet drifted like smoke, swirling around me, and for the first time in a week, I found myself breathing. The alcohol coursed through my blood, easing the heaviness in my chest, softening the tension that was squeezing my shoulders. And then, the front door swung open. I paused. Not out of fear, but out of confusion. I hadn't expected anyone to come home at this time. And certainly not Daniel. Daniel, my son, 28 years old, tall like his father, with eyes so gentle, yet so deep, that they seem to see through the facade you try to hide. He's been staying with me for the past 2 months, while his apartment is being renovated. At first, it was only temporary for a few weeks. But I didn't mind. After the divorce, this house was too quiet. So quiet that it was sometimes deafening. Daniel walked in, stopped, looked at me for a moment, and then called softly, "Mum." I looked up, cheeks flushed, swirling my wine glass around as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Hello, honey. It's been a long day. I'm just relieving myself a little." He didn't say anything right away. He just tilted his head, his eyes reading the gaps between my words. Then, without judgment, without reproach, he sat quietly on the floor, next to me. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, just 4 simple words, but they hit me straight in the heart. I could lie. I could laugh it off, pretend to be strong. But the way he asked it, calmly, sincerely, made my throat tighten. "No, not really," I whispered. And so, in the soft space of jazz and light, I began to say it all. Not all at once, but in pieces. I talked about the exhaustion, the loneliness as the house darkened. I talked about the price of always having to be strong at work, to the point that when I got home, I had no strength left to be myself. Daniel didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix anything. He just listened. Really listened. And that was enough to make me cry. I turned to look at my son. Not only did he grow up, but he grew deeper. In that moment, he wasn't just my little boy anymore. He seemed to have become a person who could truly see through me. I don't want you to see me like this. I wiped the corner of my eyes, smiling awkwardly. Drunk and broken, Daniel smiled gently, his eyes full of love. Maybe. Sometimes it's good for me to allow myself to be weak, and not knowing if it was because of the wine, the music, or the light in my son's eyes, I leaned my head against his shoulder. For the first time in years, I let myself feel held. Not by hands, but by presence, by unconditional love. You're always worrying about everyone else, Daniel said softly. Maybe it's time for someone to worry about you. Just one sentence, but it untied all the knots in my heart. We sat like that, two people tired of pretending to be okay, and finally allowing each other to truly admit that we needed to be shared. Dear friends, have you ever had a moment when the outside world completely stopped mattering? No ticking clocks, no emails tomorrow, no pressure to be strong, to be neat, to be perfect. Leave me a comment. Are you watching this video in the morning, at noon, or at night? I'm curious because sometimes the timing of a story changes how it touches your heart. That night, for Daniel and I, something changed. Not romantic love, nor anything wrong, but intimacy. The kind of intimacy that only happens when two people dare to let their shells down. In the space between us, I found a quiet beauty. Finally, Daniel helped me up. No awkwardness, no judgment, just quiet care. Mom, you should go to sleep, he said, holding me firmly. I nodded, walking past him, the warmth of his hand lingering longer than it should have. And as I walked down the hall to my room, I knew the alcohol was no longer making me feel lightheaded. Instead, there were unspoken questions. Who were we in that moment? Would what we had just shared change everything forever? I had no answers. There was only a distinct feeling that something had begun, and it would change everything. The next morning, the house was quiet. I woke to birds outside the window and the hum of the dishwasher. I lay still for a moment, wondering if the night had been a dream. But it hadn't. I had really let my son see all the tiredness, the weakness, the part of me that I hid behind my neat hair and pressed shirt. I put on my robe and walked into the kitchen. The smell of coffee was in the air before I even got there. Daniel stood there, barefoot in a t-shirt, pouring 2 cups of coffee as if this was his morning routine. He looked up, smiling warmly. Good morning. He gently pushed the cup of coffee towards me. I stood still, surprised by the way he moved around the house, as comfortable as if this had been his home for a long time. Maybe it was. Thank you, I said softly, my hands circling the warm ceramic cup, as if searching for something to hold on to. Daniel took a sip, leaned against the counter, his eyes on me. I didn't dare look directly at him. In my mind, the image of last night kept replaying over and over again. You said too much, Mom. I smiled softly, half jokingly. No, he replied immediately. You said exactly what you needed to say. That made me look up. In his eyes, there was no judgment, only understanding. But that made me feel more naked than ever. I'm not used to being weak, I confessed. I'm not weak, she replied, her voice firm. I'm just tired. And that's different. The way she called me Mom no longer felt like a title. It felt like a sacred, profound name, one that I didn't know how to face. We continued to talk a little about my work, about how she was still waiting for news from the building manager. We avoided mentioning last night as if nothing had happened. But we both knew there was a crack in the invisible wall. That afternoon, I went home early. I needed time to breathe, to sit in silence before Daniel returned from the gym or somewhere. I stepped barefoot on the wooden floor, poured myself a glass of water, and stood in front of the window, looking out at the backyard. Maybe it's silly, but I realized how much I liked having him in the house. Like the feeling of security, just knowing there was another person present. And not just because there was another person, but because it was Daniel. Elena recognized it in Daniel. The way he listened, the way he understood, without needing explanations, the way he saw his mother as a person worthy of knowing, even in her most tired, exhausted moments. Around 6 p.m., the front door opened. Daniel walked in his collar, soaked with sweat, his gym bag slung over his shoulder. "You're home early, Mom," he said, a little surprised. "Yeah, I didn't want to stay at the office for long today," Eleanor replied, half joking. Daniel nodded, putting his bag down in the hallway. For a moment, Elena noticed her son's every move, comfortable, natural, both familiar and new. "Dinner?" Daniel asked. "Did you cook?" Eleanor laughed. He smiled. "Yesterday, Mom gave me a whole party of wine and kind words. Tonight, I'll take care of it." "Oh, so the confession comes with spaghetti," she teased. Daniel chuckled. "Exactly. Drunk philosophy with garlic bread." "Perfect." Elena sat at the kitchen counter, watching Daniel fuss with the pan, the sautéed vegetables, the canned sauce. It wasn't an elaborate meal, but to her, it was the most tender care she'd received in months, maybe years. Not because of the food, but because Daniel thought of it, because he understood that his mother needed it, without her having to say it. During dinner, they really talked. Not just about pleasantries, about life, about loneliness, about the strange feeling of realizing that at a certain age, the version of yourself you've played for years suddenly doesn't fit anymore. After a while, Elena looked up, catching her son's eyes on her. It didn't make her feel embarrassed, but it made her feel seen. "You've changed," she whispered. "Me too," Daniel replied. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick, heavy, but warm, like they were both standing on the edge of something deeper, not quite ready to name. After dinner, they moved into the living room. Elena sat on the sofa, Daniel beside her, close enough for their hands to touch, as they reached for their glasses of water. "I used to think I had to be strong all the time," she said softly. "I don't need to be," he replied. "Not with you." Elena's breath caught. Once again, something warm and strange swirled in her chest. "Do you ever feel like you're missing a part of yourself?" she asked. Daniel turned his gaze softer than ever. "Always," he sighed. And just like that, the connection was there again. A subtle but distinct change in the atmosphere. Not romantic, not wrong, but deeper than Eleanor had ever imagined. That night, when Daniel had gone to his room, Eleanor stood for a long time in front of the half-open door. Her hand touched the knob, then dropped. She wasn't ready, But she couldn't deny it. Something had changed, and she didn't know if it was crossing a boundary or just finding a new truth. All night she lay awake, lying in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The house seemed to breathe with her, slowly, quietly, confusingly. The truth was, Elena didn't recognize herself anymore. Not the busy manager, not the silent widowed mother, not the woman who drank alone to ease her loneliness. And not quite the woman who sat across from her son at the dinner table tonight, unsure of where the line separated comfort from a new, unnameable kind of connection. Daniel had grown up, but not only that. He understood her in a way no one else had. Not her ex-husband, not her co-workers, not even her college friends. Something had shifted between them. Silently, but deeply. Around 6 a.m. the next morning, Eleanor put on her robe and walked out tiredly. The living room was quiet, but Daniel's door was ajar. The smell of coffee led her into the kitchen. Daniel stood there, half naked, rinsing a cup under the faucet. Looking up, he smiled sleepily. "You're up so early, Mom. I thought you were still asleep." "Couldn't sleep." He shrugged. "Same." They stood side by side, each holding a cup of coffee. Quietly. But in that space there was something unsaid, as if both were waiting for the other to speak first. Finally, Eleanor put down the cup and asked softly, "Have you ever thought, if only we had more time like this when you were young?" Daniel turned around, his eyes as distant as ever. "Yes, I think a lot." Elena's chest tightened. She remembered the years of struggling after the divorce, racing to raise her child, to pay for school fees, to take care of everything. And perhaps in the midst of that cycle of survival, she had missed the opportunity to know her son not only as a boy, but also as the man he had become. "I think so too," she whispered. "I missed a lot." Daniel shook his head, his voice gentle. "Not as much as you think?" Eleanor swallowed, "But I missed you." That afternoon, Daniel and I decided to go for a walk. It had been weeks since I had had the energy for anything but work and the familiar roof of my house. But today the weather was surprisingly nice. The late spring sun spread golden over the green trees. The wind was just enough to carry the scent of wild grass. We turned into the small path behind the park, where when Daniel was 16, he used to jog. We walked side by side, not touching, but the distance seemed shorter than ever. After a moment of silence, Daniel said softly, "I always thought my mother would never be moved." I smiled and replied, "She used to think she had to be." He shook his head. "No need anymore. At least not when I have you." I turned to look at him carefully. His face was not only more mature than before, but also sincere and warm. At that moment, I realized that Daniel was no longer the boy he used to be. He became a man who knew how to listen, who knew how to hold space for others. For me, that evening after dinner, we sat on the sofa again. No wine, just stories and a thick but not heavy silence. "Can you answer a question?" Mom Daniel suddenly spoke. Of course, I turned to him. "Yesterday you said you lost a part of yourself." "What do you mean?" I sighed, surprised that he remembered. "Maybe somewhere along the way you stopped being a woman. You became a role, a caretaker, a boss, a mother, and no longer yourself." Daniel nodded. "And do you think you can find that person again?" This time I looked at him deeply. And for the first time in years, something stirred inside me. Not romantic love, not fantasy. It was more like a realization, an awakening. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. The words hung in the air like a confession. Daniel reached out and took my hand. Nothing furtive, nothing out of line. Just a firm, gentle touch. His thumb brushed the back of my hand, and I didn't pull away. Mom, I don't want to make things weird. I just want you to know. You're not invisible. You're not alone. I see you. Oh my gosh, my dear friends, have you ever experienced something like that? A simple sentence, but enough to shatter the hard shell you've worn for years. Where are you reading this story? Where do you live? What time is it? Is it sunny or drizzling outside? Tell me, because I believe that every word we share has the power to connect us. That night, sitting alone in the moonlit room, I gently placed my hand on the spot where Daniel had touched. Just for a moment, but it was enough to change everything. From that day on, there was no awkwardness between us, but a new silence. A thin thread pulled us closer every day. In the mornings, Daniel still made coffee. I still left the house with the sound of my heels clicking on the steps. We still ate together, still talked, still laughed. But underneath it all, there was a quiet flow. Something was changing. One evening, we both sat on the back porch. The cool breeze carried the scent of the fields. The sky gradually darkened. Daniel placed a cup of tea next to me without saying a word. We sat there silent, but not distant. You know, I said softly, I've spent most of my life afraid of being seen through. Seeing through what? Seeing you as just you as Karen. Not as a role, not as a woman who always has to put on a front. Daniel turned around, his eyes determined. But I see you. That was all, but it was enough to make me choke up. We didn't say much more, just held hands, sitting silently, listening to the night wind. That night, Daniel didn't go into the living room to sleep. But we didn't need to take another step. Intimacy isn't physical. It's safety, where the heart finds a place to rest. In the days that followed, we shared more. About the past, about the divorce, about my regrets, about his fear of his father's shadow. We cried, we laughed, we healed. And one evening, as the fire crackled in the fireplace, I whispered, "This is the first time in years that I feel like myself." Daniel took my hand, his eyes warm. My mother was never gone. She was just hidden for too long. Those words were engraved in me. When the renovation was finished, Daniel returned to his own apartment. But he still visited me every week, still brought me coffee in the morning, still sat with me on the porch, in unnamed silences. The story did not end with a passionate hug or a tragedy. It ended in peace. In two people finding themselves again, finding a real, naked and beautiful connection. Dear friends, life may not always go according to the script we have drawn up. But sometimes, when we have the courage to see, even in our weakest moments, we find something more precious than anything, a truth, a love, a touch that can change everything.